Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks Show, or as we like to call it, the Load Management Podcast, because we have been refusing to do back-to-back shows for the last 2 months, Brian. I'm your host, Ray Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers. With me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. I'll let him introduce himself as soon as I just say we'll be talking about the NCAA and why they're a bullshit organization, about the NBA potentially trying to add a midseason tournament, and why Carmelo Anthony surely deserves Player of the Week. Right? All right. Hey, Brian, I hope you had a good Thanksgiving and glad you're back.
Glad you're back, too. And, yeah, boy, NBA's been great. We're going to have Chris Ye on maybe next week, talk some Lakers. But this week we're just going to get back into the fold. I'm watching the Warriors play, of course, and the Warriors are back down, at the 28th team in the league. So I feel a lot more comfortable than I did when they were playing well. They're back to being the real Warriors we all know and love.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's the biggest non-secret in the NBA, and this will be a topic we'll bring up later on the show about, the draft and stuff. We'll just keep hammering that point home over and over. I don't think the Warriors want to do well this season. And, with things like Draymond Green just getting a lot of rest and stuff like that, I wouldn't be surprised for another Harrison Barnes-like situation where their expectation is they're going to get a high draft pick and they're going to try and entice another free agent. And the issue I have, unfortunately, is I don't actually think that plan is that outlandish for them, right? They've got some cachet from being a championship team in a good market with a new stadium. They still have a major star in Steph Curry when he comes back healthy, hopefully, and Clay as well. So, there are teams that when we hear they're going to blow it up and tank and whatever, we're like, good luck with that. Like the Knicks forever, right? The Knicks, no one wants to play for the Knicks. And I mean, it's not a secret as to why James Dolan is the worst owner in the NBA. Now that
famously sued by his shareholders for being an absentee owner, touring hundreds of days a year internationally with his band instead of managing the franchise.
Although arguably, he could probably say, "Hey, that's better for the team, right?" Now that Sterling's out of the NBA, James Dolan is the worst owner in the NBA, and it's bad because he's in the best marketplace in the NBA for a team. So that's bad. No one wants to go to New York as long as he's there. And, also the Brooklyn Nets, exactly what we saw last season with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. Now that there's another team in New York in a new arena, if someone wants to go play for New York, they have other options. So as long as the Knicks are run by Dolan, they're not going to be a marquee destination. But I don't see anything that says a big name doesn't want to go to Golden State. And in fact, they already had some draw, right? Both Kevin Durant and Andre Iguodala both, forced their way into the team. So it's going to be a few years before I'm really, really worried. And even this season where we were bashing the Warriors for some bad stuff, right? We thought D'Angelo Russell was a poor return on what they could have got for Kevin Durant, right? There were much better things they probably could have flipped that into for sure. Obviously, re-signing Clay even before the injury was kind of an iffy decision. After the injury was like, what the hell are you thinking? Even in spite of all of that, they've just had some severe bad luck with injuries. Draymond Green isn't healthy. Steph Curry got injured. It's been an unlucky season, so I'll have to wait for the future to see what becomes of them.
Yeah, we may as well get this Warriors conversation finished now because it's on the script, right? I think they actually did think they were going to try to win going into the season. But like you said, a lot of bad luck with the injuries. The problem with where they are now is, maybe they do have enough cachet to lure a free agent, but they do not have enough cash. They would have to move that D'Angelo Russell and Klay Thompson probably to try to sign a free agent, and that's just going to really be threading the needle. So,
well, there's lots to be done, right? If they get a high draft pick and maybe Draymond wants out or Clay wants out or whatever, there are things to be done. So I'm saying I'm not worried just yet about their future. There are teams like the Knicks are an example where I'm just like, oh my goodness, you have no place to go. No one wants to come here. You have great assets. You've spent all your money. Dear God, what are you going to do? The Golden State Warriors are a team where I would go, hey, if genie grants a wish or something and we really mess up our wish, or the genie is really oddly specific and is like, you are allowed to wish to have control of one NBA front office or whatever, but it can't be these teams. And for whatever reason, the Warriors were on the list. They'd be like, oh yeah, I'll take the Warriors. And I don't think they're that far from being well run. I mean, that's honestly been their case in the, I'll put it in the light years era. So, the Lacob ownership. This team has always been really, really close to being a great team. Case in point, they became a great team, and they've teetered on the edge with some bad decisions, but it's like, yeah, one or two good decisions and they're fine.
Yeah, I guess here's the way I'll put it to end this is it would have been a pretty light lift to reload this team to be a championship contender this year, last offseason, if they had wanted to. If they had, well, we talked about it, right? Let Kevin Durant go, let Clay go, sign a Derek Favors, keep Iguodala, get maybe one more guy. Steph Curry and Draymond Green end up being healthy. This is like the perfect scenario, right? That's another title contender. They chose to go in a different direction, and now it's not. It's a much heavier lift to really, thread the needle is the word I keep thinking of, right? To make all these different things happen with all these big contracts. This would be a Sisyphean type of lift for them to roll that up the hill. Like, these are big contracts, Trey.
What's frustrating, Masai Ujiri in Toronto showed, and we have seen time and time again in the NBA, that no contract's untradeable, especially not a perceived star. Klay Thompson and D'Angelo Russell are not hard players to trade away. And, here's a team
What I mean is, do we trust their front office to be able to pull it off, though? If it was Masai, I'd say yes, but they seem to not be Masai.
Absolutely not, but who knows? I mean, the other part that's really weird about the NBA is just how often kind of luck happens. I mean, the Warriors. So that's the thing is, I mean, honestly, if they get the right trade for, say, Klay Thompson or D'Angelo Russell, or let's say D'Angelo Russell improves because he already looked better, and I haven't actually looked at their numbers recently, but I know he's had some injuries. But let's say, hypothetically, D'Angelo Russell improves. They move Klay Thompson and a draft pick for a star, say Giannis. They're already back on it. So it's the main point I kind of make about the NBA all the time is that teams are not run optimally, but because the NBA is a zero-sum game that's graded on the curve, you don't have to be that great of a front office. And sometimes it's just the position of the assets you have. And I guess that's what I would argue is that the Warriors are fine on assets. But, things like letting Jordan Bell out the door, right? That's just weird. Why on earth did they, letting Andre Iguodala let go unceremoniously when he probably could be helping him out this season? Yeah. All this kind of stuff, is what it is. Let's see. So, by the way, I realize we haven't actually listed our sponsor in a couple weeks, so let's actually make sure we do that, Brian, and then we can get going. We'll take a detraction and talk the NCAA because I actually wrote a post, and then this is just kind of a normal dead period for us. But Thanksgiving, right? Obviously, first off, Thanksgiving week. Anybody in any normal job scenario is aware. You don't work service industry. And by the way, God bless you if you do. I had years of doing that. And, Thanksgiving week, Black Friday is horrible. But, for most places, it's just a dead zone the week of Thanksgiving. And it is actually the week of my son's birthday. So I have family traveling. So basically at the Boxscore Geeks, the week of Thanksgiving is always just going to be a dead zone. So I released a piece 2 weeks ago. The podcast fell short. As you mentioned, we were hoping to have Chris Ye on. And then our schedules didn't, we basically had a solar eclipse scenario where there was this one brief window we might have been able to make it work. And then because you, me, and Chris are also busy, we couldn't. And so it was a dead zone in Thanksgiving. So we're going to be discussing a piece I wrote 2 weeks ago and hopefully kind of get back on the horse trying to produce content and stuff at the Boxscore Geeks. So we're going to talk the NCAA as a brief distraction. We're going to talk some weirdness about the NBA draft. And then we're going to talk Giannis and Carmelo. I think I already said that once. So you get to hear it 3 times. First, our sponsor, though, dailyroto.com. Obviously, we're in the midst of, we're still finishing off NFL football. So if you're worried about fantasy sports, NBA, they do football as well. College sports, we were talking with Devin Dignam, that's still a thing. So it is prime time for daily fantasy sports. And if you need a site that has ratings and optimization, if you go to dailyroto.com and use promo code NerdNumbers, you can get 10% off. Go do that. I haven't looked if they've got sportsbook stuff, but that's also becoming a thing. So, knowing sports, knowing statistics, having the right tools. DailyRoto.com, promo code nerd numbers helps us keep the lights on. And we might talk some more of that. Brian didn't have anything prepared, obviously, but let's just get into the NCAA. So despite the fact that I've had several pieces on the back burner I really need to get out and written, including one on the NBA draft, something happened that just forced me to write a piece, and it had a bunch of parts moving in my head. So it came out of me, and it was because of James Wiseman. So this is kind of a slightly older topic, but it got enough engagement. I definitely want to talk it. So for those that don't know, James Wiseman was a top recruit. I believe he was the number one recruit for the NCAA, and he went to Memphis under Penny Hardaway. However, the NCAA ended up declaring him ineligible. He's got a 12-game suspension, and they fined him $11,500. The way the NCAA works on this, by the way, is that they can fine you if they believe that you received illicit help or compensation. They can fine you and basically say you have to repay that to a charity. And, for what it's worth, I've seen a lot of people come out and make the thing like, how is he supposed to repay it as a college student not getting paid? Those are fair points. But the NCAA does have a system in place that's like you can repay it over time, whatever. It's still bullshit. I don't want to make the claim that just because it is a formal rule and that there are more logical methods for how players can repay it, that it's justified in the slightest. And the reason they have fined James Wiseman $11,500 and suspended him for 12 games is Penny Hardaway saw James Wiseman play in high school. He recruited James Wiseman to come play under him in high school because I think he saw him at like McDonald's All-American or one of these contests where high school kids go around and show off that they're good prospects. Penny Hardaway recruited him to come and play under him at high school. I forget the specific high school. There's a good ESPN article that I link in the post I put that has a full timeline. So Penny Hardaway recruited him as a high school student. Then Penny Hardaway donated $1 million to Memphis, and then they signed him on as a college coach. And then after that, he recruited James Wiseman to come play for him in college. And the belief, of course, that the NCAA has is that James Wiseman believes that and I hope I'm saying the names right. If it's like Wiseman or something, I sincerely apologize, but I think it's Wiseman. They're arguing that Penny Hardaway incentivized James to come play for him at the University of Memphis by paying for his family to relocate while he was in high school. And there is so much fucked up about this that I can't even begin. I brought this up a few times, but the book The Blind Side and the movie The Blind Side, which is about Michael Orr, who was it's a defensive position that defends the blind side in football. He
was a left tackle on offense, I think. Defending the quarterback. Yeah,
basically his job is to defend the quarterback. One of the most important.
That narrative is overrated, by the way, the blind side narrative. But he was still a good player that went on to play in the NFL.
We've said this before, like Michael Lewis, very much like Malcolm Gladwell, fantastic storyteller, but his narratives are only as good as the data he's fed. So sometimes when we see both Gladwell and Michael Lewis do like NBA storylines, if they bury us feeding the data, we're like, fantastic story. Other times, not so much. But okay, so anyway, Michael Orr, highly recruited college athlete. And the story in The Blind Side is that this rich family, also in Memphis, so weird, basically took him in high school, gave him a lot of money, really helped him out. He was ineligible academically. So they did things like letting him retake classes that the high school would let him do, got him a tutor, had him take college courses so he was able to boost his GPA. And I believe they got him recruited to Ole Miss. And so all of this happens. And, in the story, the NCAA is really investigating him hard. And the NCAA, non-ironically, says, can you believe what would happen if rich families suddenly started funneling in underprivileged black kids into major universities? And so what's funny is a lot of times when you see based on a true story movies, the movie itself, you're like, oh, that's over the top or whatever. That is straight from reality. The Toonies, who I believe I'm saying the family name right, the one that helped out Michael Orr, they recorded the conversations and stuff and fought with the NCAA. The NCAA is an evil organization. It's one of these where if you're on the side of it, I have nothing for you. If you love college sports, and it's really hard, one of our favorite guests we've had on the show is Jonathan Weiler, who teaches at UNC Chapel Hill. You know, an amazing school for college athletics, as well as an amazing school for like NCAA violations and stuff. And he accepts, he writes all the time about problems with college athletics and about, paper classes and all of this, and he's had a front row seat at UNC to it. And he admits, he's like, I am a huge, huge fan of UNC sports. And it's really hard not to be, right? I'm in Wisconsin. The Badgers are huge here. It's a really hard dichotomy to say, I love college sports. And I understand that. You can love college sports. But if you're on the NCAA side, you're just fucking wrong. I apologize. And but yeah, that in the book, The Blind Side, and the movie, the NCAA is like, can you believe what would happen if rich people suddenly started helping out poor black people? And you're like, are you fucking kidding me? And wow, I'm really going through my F-bomb count, Brian, just because the NCAA gets me that incensed. And it's very much the same thing with James Wiseman. Penny Hardaway, one of the greatest basketball players ever. By the way, he is. Let's take a brief tangent to be a little more lighthearted, Brian, because this topic comes up all the time and it's a lot of fun. He's on the Mount Rushmore of what if healthy players, right? I think Penny Hardaway, Grant Hill for sure, Greg Oden maybe. But, I think the Penny Hardaway and Grant Hill ones are the most interesting because they are players that had a healthy enough, long enough career for us to see what they were becoming.
Yeah.
To get pulled away. So, for instance, like Greg Oden is really tough because we're like,
he was never actually good in the NBA, right? Well, he was hurt before he got to the NBA.
He was really productive, but in very limited times. Whereas Grant Hill and Penny Hardaway both put up, if not MVP caliber, like close to MVP. Yeah. I believe Grant Hill was very close to MVP caliber. I think he led the NBA in All-Star votes one year.
Because he rose up right after Jordan retired, right? So Grant Hill was kind of anointed as the new best player.
And yeah, I think we were both talking, we're old enough to remember the Sprite ad campaigns with him that were a lot of fun. Penny Hardaway is another person.
Little Penny, of course.
There's a great ESPN 30 for 30 on the Orlando Magic with Penny Hardaway and Shaquille O'Neal and what happened between them. So, definitely the Mount Rushmore of what if careers and, oh my goodness, if he could be healthy, certain like Tracy. By the way, it's amazing how many of the what if players ended up playing for Orlando, right? Tracy McGrady, Grant Hill, Penny Hardaway, right? Those three alone, like you're like, oh my goodness, if they'd all been healthy at the same time for Orlando, that would have been incredible. So,
and maybe Tim Duncan would have ended up in Orlando too.
Yeah, well, that's another huge what if in the Orlando saga is what if they had gotten Grant Hill healthy. Grant Hill, Tracy McGrady, and Tim Duncan, and all healthy. Oof. Goodness, that could have been something. But anyway, so Penny Hardaway recruiting this kid and then bringing him to college with them, saying, can you believe this? Can you believe this guy is trying to help an underprivileged kid get a leg up in high school and then get a leg up in college? And we actually did get some engagement in the comment section. Patrick actually came out, was incensed. And what I would say, because Patrick's going, can you fucking believe this? And what I'll say, I've read up on it. The NCAA does have the rules for this, but it's a really weird precedent and one that I don't think would happen, but I would love to see happen, which is, why can't people go after a leg up above the Felicity Huffman scenario? So for those that don't recall, Felicity Huffman and what was the other big name from Full House? So it was Felicity Huffman and Lori, I believe, right?
Oh, you're talking about the college admission thing?
College admission scandals. There are basically some
Lori Loughlin?
I think Lori Loughlin is right. So
Loughlin and Huffman, that sounds too similar, but anyway.
Anyway, so I'll look it up really quick. But it is Loughlin. But so, by the way, here's a funny thing. So the reason Felicity Huffman's famous is, she's been on some various huge shows, including like Desperate Housewives. She was also on Sports Night, which was about an ESPN show, and she was the executive producer on it. And then also in that show, her brother got into a steroid scandal. So it's interesting that both Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman were on television shows where there was a scandal involved. The funny thing people have looked up is on Full House, there was a show around Lori Loughlin's character. I forget her name, but she was married to Uncle Jesse on the show. They basically lied to try and get their kids into a private, it was a preschool. But it's like, oh, really? So
that's
these
funny.
high-profile actresses used basically fake NCAA athletics to get their kids admitted into high-profile schools, and they got busted for it and got, a slap on the wrist because our justice system says if you're rich, you don't get penalized heavily. But a step above that, right? If I'm a legacy at a major school, let's say like Duke, and I give my child lots of money to train at, say, basketball or hockey or some other athletic, and then I also give lots of money to Duke, and then my kid goes to Duke, should we be allowed to come after that parent and kid and say, you really should give $500,000 to charity because of all of the money and attention you have given that student that got them into Duke? Because that's essentially what they're arguing with Penny Hardaway. They're saying you had a long con, right, which is a weird way of phrasing it, to get James Wiseman into Memphis. And this long con involved moving this kid to go to a better high school where he could play better basketball, and then, getting a coaching job and then bringing him along with you. And I said this in the article. I was like, so what? Like, why? The angle I took that I liked in the article, Brian, so I'm complimenting myself, patting myself on the back, is I actually said, let's leave the NCAA on the side and view it for what it is. The NCAA, in regards to basketball in the United States, is our developmental league, right? It's our AAA farm system, right, that every NBA team gets their upcoming talent from. And I went, it is baffling how the NCAA and it's funny because a lot of times when race comes up on the show, Brian, I like to say implicit. Implicit meaning where it's racist, but when people start pressing on it, it gets very frustrating because they're like, they use dog whistles, they use other terms where you basically they're not being explicitly racist, and then they can use that as a shield of deniability. They're saying, I'm not saying I dislike this group of people, I'm just saying, and they use some word that basically is a sub-in for that group of people. The NCAA gets to the point where it's almost explicitly racist, where it is going, we don't want this poor black kid to get paid. And that is so much of what they do to an almost villainous degree where, like I said, a lot of times when we deal with race, it's very nuanced and complex. And I say it's an implicit thing that's very hard to deal with. The NCAA hits the point where I'm saying they are almost staunchly in a weird vibe. And the reason I don't feel bad about this is the South Park episode, Brian. South Park did an amazing episode making fun of the NCAA where they just compared them, using a metaphor we've heard lots of times before, to slave plantations. This is a mainstream thought that has come up, and it smacks too much. Like I said, this Wiseman scenario of going, can you believe this kid got paid money to go to a better high school and then recruited to a good college? That is unacceptable. And you're going, why the heck? And like I said, the sideways way I looked at that as I was going, if you're the NBA and you're trying to train future athletes who are going to be your stars, and another metaphor that's come up a lot, Brian, I've loved that you've brought this into kind of our lexicon, is like the C-level executive NBA player.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm going to start using it. I'm going to call it the Brian C-level executive NBA player. I'm going to have to think of a snap.
Not sure, again, that I thought of it, but yeah, I've been talking about it. So, yeah, I think it's a good way to put it.
Okay, so if you track down who put it in your head first, or if we find out it's a common thing.
Probably you or Patrick, but anyway.
Well,
but yeah, go ahead.
But no, I'm saying the reason it's good is that Patrick and I bring up a lot that a lot of these players are high-paid, important assets on teams. You came the other way and you said, if you looked at a company and looked at how they pay people, players like Karl Anthony Towns and Joel Embiid and Giannis Antetokounmpo and Steph Curry are C-level executives.
They make more than $20 million a year, right?
The top of Fortune 500 companies.
Yep.
When there's stupid stuff around these people, we should get concerned. And so if hypothetically you're a company like Google or Microsoft, and these companies do stuff like this, right, where they try and glean new talent young, right? So they'll give scholarships to people to go to good schools or give them, high-paying internships, all this stuff. If there was some organization in front of Google that said, listen, I know you found this wunderkind, this 15-year-old amazing software developer or whatever, and you really want him to come to your company and you think he could be a CTO level person someday, but no, we're not going to let you give him money or her money or them money, right? Let's go all over the place. Google would be like, no, go away. And by the way, in the real world, there are, people are allowed to get paid. One of the funny things to me, Brian, is I went to CSU. I was a graduate a teaching assistant. So basically, I was paid to teach 2 recitations. So these are like supplementary classes. There are 3 lectures that a kid, well, it's funny to call them kids, but a college student would get in our classes. They'd get 3 lectures, and then they would get an additional class where they would go to the lab and, work on assignments. And a teacher's assistant like myself could go over some material and then help out with the assignment. So it's kind of like a half lecture and then half kind of study hall, work on the assignment thing. So I did that in college, and I was paid better than college athletes, right? I got my tuition covered. I actually got a salary that amounted to about $20,000 a year. It was $20 an hour, but part-time, so 20 hours a week. I was allowed to, if I wanted, do other jobs. I actually did in the off season, so to speak, right in the summers. I did intern at HP and IBM. So it's like I was paid better than college athletes, and I was a student employee at CSU. So it is ludicrous to kind of say, no, these group, right, the college student athletes are not allowed to make money. It's ridiculous when there are other people in the same ecosystem, myself included, that were able to get paid very well. And, certainly when I was going to school, I didn't like invent anything, but if I had, it's not like the school would say, you're not allowed to profit off of any software development related stuff you do outside of school. Whereas I brought up, in this article, I brought up LeBron James in high school. And so this wasn't the NCAA. This was actually the Ohio College Athletic Board. They suspended LeBron James in high school because he got paid $800 in jerseys. So a sports memorabilia store gave him 2 jerseys worth roughly $800 for signing, for like posing for a photo for the thing. And it makes sense. This is like stupid diner thing, right? This person's famous. I'll take a picture of him. I put it on my wall, and to thank him, I give him a free meal, or in this case, free jerseys. They suspended him for that. In college, if I did some software development and charged for it, CSU wouldn't have come after me and kicked me out of school. Whereas that happens to college athletes all the time. And it just gets weird. And this was a really roundabout way, but getting all the way back to the beginning, it's standing in the way of progress of future C-level executive talent for the NBA. And the one player that I love, and I understand he's an outlier. The crystallizing thought that brought this up, Brian, was Luka Doncic. Luka Doncic at age 20 is ridiculous. Now, I'm not going to be so outlandish as to say there is a field of Luka Doncic's the NBA could have access to. But what I'll say is that the 2 players I compared were LeBron James and Luka Doncic. I noted that LeBron James was amazing, and LeBron James entered the NBA right out of high school. But in high school, LeBron James had this North American system of amateurism that says you're not allowed to get paid, you're not allowed to train extra. And he was a little rusty his first year in the NBA. He was a decent rookie player, which is impressive, but he was not a star caliber player. Whereas Luka Doncic, as a rookie, was this close to being a Brian Star, which is twice as good as a normal NBA player. And now we argue he's possibly the best player in the NBA. And I just said, on the one hand, I'm not saying LeBron James could have come into the NBA better. But on the other hand, I am saying that. And I am noting that we have a system in place in the United States between high school athletic associations and the NCAA that is hampering future talent of a multi-billion dollar, and by the way, like multi-billion dollars, understating it, right? Because every NBA team is worth at least $1 billion. So do we really have this like $30 billion enterprise that is letting this amateur system hamper future talent, or are we really okay with that?
Yeah, well said, and I really enjoyed this article. So the historian who we've talked about on the show in the past, who comes to mind immediately when we're talking about this kind of thing, is Taylor Branch, right? He's written about the NCAA. He calls it a plantation mindset. And while he says it's not strictly slavery, these players can, come and go as they please, it really is similar to indentured servitude. They have this delayed, payoff where they have to sign up for a certain period of time, right? And they don't get anything for it, while the firms, in this case the schools, will profit from it. So, yeah, it's a joke. And, here we are in early December 2019, and things are pretty wild in America right now. And the NCAA they know, I think, almost that they've been exposed. The mainstream media's turned against them. And at this point, it's just pure power plays almost. Like we're gonna keep the system entrenched as long as we can. We talked about how the players' likenesses, originally the Ed O'Bannon lawsuit, that was ruled in favor of the players recently. So they're going to be able to make money off their likenesses. And Arturo and other smart people have said that this could be the beginning of the end for the NCAA. Now, I think the reason why the NCAA exists is because the power conferences, which really have all the control here, want them to exist, right? If the NCAA becomes too big of a liability, the power conferences can go form their own league or, do whatever they want. They have their own, TV networks now and all that. So will we get to the point where the NCAA becomes too big of a liability for the power conferences? Or is there a situation where the power conferences like the NCAA, because they can be the hatchet man, right? They can go in and crack down on James Wiseman and keep his, salary low or zero, and the power conferences don't have to deal with that.
We've talked a ton about that, and I think that is the thing, is that we think the NCAA lets the NBA out of some liability, right? Young players are really hard to predict, and so it is nice to have another organization, have them play for free, so you can so you can see what they'll become while also suppressing wages. That's another key, right? The NBA draft lottery system means that the highest player in the NBA draft lottery is basically paid like a mid-level exception contract. So the NBA teams kind of collectively agree, in order to suppress wages of incoming talent and suppress bargaining ability, right? Because they're not allowed to fight with teams. We'll let them do this. And what I'm questioning is, is there a breaking point where NBA teams go, I can't risk future assets that are worth this much to my team to be developed by this? A good example, so I listed a lot, and the two cases that I really love. So Ben Simmons and Donovan Mitchell, what I loved about these two rookie of the year caliber players, right? They finished 1-2 in rookie of the year voting. One of these players goes back to school, plays under an esteemed coach, Rick Pitino, makes the March Madness tournament, makes the second round, gets drafted, top 15. That's the story we're told is good. And so that's Donovan Mitchell. Whereas Ben Simmons gets injured, spends the entire season riding the bench with the Philadelphia 76ers, working with their training staff, working with the team. They're vying for rookie of the year, and Donovan Mitchell starts saying, this isn't fair. He goes, it's not fair because Ben Simmons got a year. The metaphor he used was Ben Simmons got a year extra to study for the same test that they're now both taking, which is funny because, the way the rookie of the year race works is just basically says if you haven't played the NBA, you're rookie eligible, which is how we get ridiculous stuff like Malcolm Brogdon won rookie of the year coming in after 4 years of college. That's a funny scenario to call him a rookie versus other players that are 4 years younger. But the rookie of the year, that is what it is. And the thing that I said, though, is Ben Simmons agreed. Ben Simmons, when he talks about the NCAA, is like, this is a bullshit organization. I just went because I had to, right? The rules in the NBA say that you have to wait a year before you're eligible to come in. You have to be 19 years old. And so he was like, I had a year to kill, so I went to school. I believe he had family ties to LSU, so that's why he chose LSU. But it's like, I had no reason to go. And so Ben Simmons and Donovan Mitchell agree they didn't benefit at all from college. And if anything, they would have benefited more from just following around an NBA team. And that brings us up to the next player. Zion Williamson has yet to play a game in the NBA. He's the number 1 draft pick, huge asset, and he got injured playing amateur basketball. And we don't know if there are long-term repercussions to that. So what it comes down to is these players are agreeing, I'm not benefiting from playing in college. This isn't a helpful system. And it's also potentially risking me because you can get injured in college. And I think something I didn't even bring up in the article, but I think I saw like LeBron James talk about like what are the high school amateur ones called, like AAU or something, or AUU?
Yeah. So AAU is the system, that we're the traveling teams. And a lot of people contrast it with the European Academy system because that is a system that's affiliated with the pro teams that are training them up, in the same system to theoretically, this is all coaching stuff, so I don't know how valid it is, but yeah, that system is trying to get you into professional. Like, whereas AAU, they travel all the time. They're just trying to get hype and highlights, and it's not really good training for future basketball.
But the reason I think that's kind of important is LeBron James was talking about the AAU, and we're talking load management. So in the NBA, this idea of managing the load of players, like, certainly the big names like Kawhi Leonard are coming up saying the health of these players matters. And so NBA teams are taking precautions to keep them safe. C-level executive argument, right? If I'm paying a guy $25 million a season and I'm expecting him to win me an NBA title, why the hell am I going to risk him being injured for an entire season over a bullshit back-to-back game against New York or something? And certainly a lot of these teams that are constructed well, we always argue this was a brilliant part of the Spurs construction, is they basically had a bench that was the mean phrase we would use is they were an Eastern Conference playoff worthy team on their bench, because the East was always really sucky at the playoffs. So the Spurs always had a bunch of good backups, so the Spurs could always compete and rest. They notoriously would rest their big three, Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker, when all of those were in their 30s. They notoriously rested them on back-to-backs all the time, keeping these guys healthy for the playoffs is key. And this has been around forever. Phil Jackson did this with Shaquille O'Neal as well back in the day. So load management being a big issue, LeBron James came out and said, for all this talk of load management, AAU teams do not give a fuck about the load management of their students. And the same thing, right? If you're a college squad that is going to lose Zion Williamson after a season, are you honestly telling me that you're concerned with his long-term health over just having him play in a tournament that might be worth millions of booster dollars to your system? So that's the other part, is that the health of these not only are these players not really benefiting in a developmental standpoint, they're now risking a liability in a school that we can't guarantee is training them right. An NBA team can have the best doctors and the load management and monitor players correctly. There is nothing that says college systems have the same incentives. So really, the long-term hope I have is that the NBA says, we have millions of dollars of future assets coming in through this system, and they're holding back their development. They are risking their health, and we can't deal with this. That is my sincere hope. And like I said, Luka Doncic is to me going, this guy was playing professionally at 18. He was an MVP of the EuroLeague, getting probably the best training and best care outside of an NBA team that he could get. And he is smoking even other greats at the same age, right? He is better than LeBron James was at his respective age. And I have no idea if the NBA is going to stay as short-sighted as they are, because we're going to talk the draft in a second. And something about the draft that we've argued forever is that it's a stupid system, but there are short-sighted goals that teams keep falling over instead of thinking more long-term when dealing with the NBA draft. So there's nothing that says they will go, hey, this is a bad plan. But that's what we're saying, is that the NCAA is making the NBA a worse product. I didn't tie this in the article, Brian, and don't have it concretely, but another popular topic this year is falling NBA ratings. I think a few simple things, we talked about it at length 2 weeks ago, but just a few simple notes. The powerhouse teams are weak this year, right? A lot of that due to injury.
Well, the big city teams, right? There's still really good teams this year, I would argue. They're just not. Golden State and Cleveland not being the same as they were before. That's a huge problem. Obviously some players moving, that's a big deal. So that's an issue. We've argued, League Pass, they've done horrible stuff with it. But a real thing that I've seen people note is, if you want the league to stay popular, you really have to promote all teams so that there's fan interest when other teams pop up. And to the same note, if you want the NBA to stay strong, you really want your future stars to be good. An easy comparable is the WWE. The problem the WWE has, and a lot of WWE stars, this is professional wrestling for those that don't know, even though we talk at every show, so I'd be shocked that you don't. Professional wrestling kind of reached its apex in the mid-90s. And what the WWE needed to do after that was grow future stars so that future fans would be interested. But what they've really done is milk nostalgia, which is why we see the same people that you and I know from the 90s in wrestling, Brian, are mainlining WWE events now, because they're not growing their product, and that's what you need to do.
if the NBA wants to stay popular when LeBron James and Steph Curry and Kevin Durant get old, they need future talent. And if that future talent gets injured, which Zion Williamson is right now, for instance, it hurts the league. So I would hope that they'd go, enough of this bullshit with this amateur organization. Our future stars are worth millions to billions of dollars collectively. We really need to get them in a better system. And they have the G League, right? So like the NBA already has a system. Yep. You can literally just take the NCAA out if they want to. And the reason they're not is it's a cartel that lets them suppress future talent in terms of price and mobility. And I'm going way back in the day when the American Basketball Association was competing with the NBA. One of the things they did is they started sniping high school students because the NBA used to basically say, yeah, you were supposed to play 4 years of college before you went to the NBA. I don't remember if it was an explicit rule or implicit rule, but it was just kind of how things are done. And then the ABA came along and said, how are we going to get talented rookies when they're obviously going to want to go to the NBA over us? They said, well, we could just offer players that are not NBA eligible to come to us. And that's what they did. And it worked out really well. I think Spencer Haywood was a huge lawsuit about that at the time. So the NBA could do that. The NBA could just say, fuck it, come to the G League. And I would hope that happens. Of course, we're pessimistic on the show always about big evil organizations that should go away, but somehow stick around and stay in power. So
yeah, the NBA is definitely laying the groundwork for it. There's been reporting in the last few weeks that they're going to move towards getting rid of one and dones, basically. I don't know what that means exactly. But yeah, now that the G League is in place, remember, it wasn't that long ago that there were teams without G League teams that were sharing G League teams. But now, they're getting better. So, I got one last thing on this getting back to Penny Hardaway real fast. Like, one of the things that, again, in this era we're finding out is philanthropy in general is kind of bullshit, right? Like if you look at the top billionaires, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates are giving away a lot of money. Bill Gates did the giving pledge and all that.
And I'll cut in. I think you're probably going there, but I want this explicit before we even go down this. Like,
sure.
Bill Gates has more money now than when he retired from Microsoft.
Yes.
Despite all this stuff, because if you're rich, you can get it. And I think the best I saw, was from Corbyn in Britain, where Jeff Bezos said he was giving away a bunch of money. And his response was, he said, like, that's 0.09% of your net worth. Just pay your damn taxes. So it's like, yeah, billionaires get away with philanthropy by saying I'm helping out, when the reality is if they just paid 10% of their worth in taxes, it would be worth way more to society.
Yeah, and and you said it right. And this was famously said by a great young historian that I love, Rutger Bregman, at Davos a year or two ago, and he said it's taxes, taxes, taxes. Everything else is bullshit. And you're right. That definitely applies here. But yeah, so Gates and Buffett give away, I think, 3 or 4% each year to charity, and that's a lot because they make a lot of money. But all the other top billionaires give away, 1%, 0.5% or less, like you were saying. So, in regular, everyday people, like I have to claim I'm not a religious person, but what is the tithe rate? It's a lot higher than that, right? And I think regular people will give 5% to charity, even themselves. So yeah, it's just the whole philanthropy narrative is pretty bullshit. And so let's go to Penny Hardaway. He's like, okay, I'll do this thing for this kid. Maybe he'll become a good player. Maybe he'll reward me someday and join my team. And then the NCAA is like, no, you can't even do this. That's how far we're going to grind these players down. It's just kind of sad.
So I worked at Google, as I bring up every couple of shows, obviously. And a popular Google story, find one of the books or whatever, one of the TED Talks or something. I believe you'll find, how did I just drop his name? It's Sergey Brin, and who's the second? Larry Page. Actually, it was Sergey Brin. So he would say there was a point when they were at Stanford, and they were telling, Stanford's got a bunch of venture capitalists hovering nearby that want to come by and invest in the next big thing. And so Larry and Sergey had just started Google, and a venture capitalist came by and was like, I love it. And he gave them a check for like $100,000. And the kind of jokey, rich, fuck you guys story end of this is he was like, actually, we hadn't even incorporated yet, so we couldn't cash that check, right? Because it was made out to Google, it wasn't made out to them. So like their funny haha story is like, we were at Stanford and a random billionaire just gave us $100,000 and haha tee hee, we weren't even able to cash it at the time because we weren't ready. This idea that rich people don't get help is the biggest load of crap, and I hate it so much. This the phrase "pull yourself up by the bootstraps." The funny thing is it's supposed to be a joke, because bootstraps you can't, right? Like the logic being, if I've got straps on my boots and I try and pull them up, my feet are holding me down. I can't pull myself up. It's supposed to be a jokey expression saying you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps because you're holding yourself down. You would need help to get your boots up. Ha ha. And people take it at face value. Another funny one of these, Brian, is the term Nimrod is an insult. And the reason it's an insult is there was an old Bugs Bunny cartoon. Nimrod is actually I think it's a Greek god. It's I think Greek or Roman god of hunting, and is a great hunt, or if not a god, a great hunter in mythology. And there was a Bugs Bunny cartoon where he called Elmer Fudd Nimrod, ironically. But people didn't get the reference, so they thought it was an insult. And so Nimrod has caught on in pop culture as an insult, even though the reality was Nimrod actually means great hunter. It was being used sarcastically. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps was a phrase that was being used as a joke that is caught, people have caught on and go, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. No, you didn't. Every successful person has had help. I was just bringing up the example of how many legitimate, not Felicity Huffman, Lori Loughlin athletes, how many legitimate Division I athletes are children of wealthy families that got lots and lots of training and extra help when they were young in sports. We took my son ice skating the other day, and we talked to some people about like getting him into hockey. So that, we were at a public rink and there's some people that, coached Pee Wee hockey, and they were like laughing. They were like, oh, it gets expensive quick. They're like, yeah, by the time, like when they first start, you can like borrow equipment. They're like, but if they get into a reasonable league, like the skates can be $200 easy. It's like, oh dear God. So this idea that there are all these Division I athletes that had to get lots of help to get to where they are before they are successful is just common. And so you're right. It's funny where this weird thing of going, how dare this kid get extra help? It's like that happens all the time everywhere. All of the successful business people that we laud as being great, if you dig into their past, I guarantee you every single one of them has some story at some point that's either family-based or school-based or just random person recognizing their talent. One of my favorite actually athlete examples. So this is Julius Erving, Dr. J, one of the greatest basketball players ever. His autobiography is great. And what's funny is in his autobiography, towards the end, he gets into this meritocracy argument of like, I had some help, but I had to come, persevere against all odds and do it myself. Part of his story is when he was a kid, he was so good at basketball. There was a coach, a scout that was, for like high school teams that would go around local playgrounds. And he saw Dr. J and he basically recruited him and brought him in and gave him extra training and had him training with like the top high school athletes. So like this random person came up and said, you are great at basketball. I want you to get better. Everybody great has some story like that. My family helped me out. Somebody found me and gave me extra help. And so when the NCAA comes in and says it's unfair that Penny Hardaway helped out James Wiseman, I'm like, that's an interesting precedent, because if you want to go through all the athletes in your programs in Division I sports, I guarantee you a lot of them got a lot of extra help early. And it's very odd to say it's okay that they got extra help because they were born to a wealthy family.
Yeah, and just briefly on that, I mean, the ridiculous of these arguments just goes to show how bogus they are and how it's not about fairness. It's just about pure power, and that's it.
Yeah, it is very telling when you say this type of person getting this type of help from these people is okay, but this type of person getting a quote unquote handout is not okay. And it's like I said, there's implicit racism, and the NCAA crosses the board so much where I'm just like, it's very explicit and it's messed up and it's troubling to be a part of.
Yeah, and just briefly, people can say, well, they know the rules and they're not following the rules and they choose to participate in the system, and there's all kind of jokes we can make about that. But I always get back to the Arian Foster story, right? Great NFL running back. He played at Tennessee, and he did not break the rules, but he famously, and some of his teammates were with him, I believe, went to the coach and said, "We're starving. We can't afford to pay for food. What do we do?" I mean, and meanwhile, his face is on the billboard, and he's the star player of the team, right, making all this money for the university. So that story will always stick with me.
Yeah, and that is huge. And then, the comment section, thanks a lot to the comments. This was kind of just everybody agreed, which, I knew I was preaching to the choir. I know the Boxscore Geeks crowd. But thanks to Andrew Sutton, rebound and threes, and Todd, too, as well as Trick Will. And, some of the consensus is I don't think it will happen is that James Wiseman should just sit out and say, F it. I know I'm a top pick. Draft me. I'm not going to play another game for you. The other thing we didn't bring up that I'm just going to touch on briefly is this idea of they should just play overseas. And all I'll stress is, one, that is a hard thing to ask, right? To move thousands of miles away to play. And then also just it's if you aren't familiar with the system, right? Kobe Bryant is an example. His dad was a professional basketball player. He went over to Italy when he was younger to play. That's having someone who knows the ropes and knows the system. To ask someone who doesn't necessarily have the support system in place to just go thousands of miles away from their family as a high schooler to play is just a rough pill. And what makes it more egregious to me, and I think I said on Twitter a bunch, is we have the G League and the NCAA in place here. Why on earth are we going? We already have the system set up to train future basketball players to be the best players in the world. Why on earth would we say, well, just if you don't like it, just, go thousands of miles? I'm like, no, we need to fix this system because I want good basketball, and this system has become a hindrance to good basketball. Well, we really went long on that, Brian. I'll let us talk. The last two topics should go pretty quick just because they're kind of funny. The NBA is just kind of kicking around some ideas, and a well-known thing that is going to come up this year is tanking. And the reason I bring it up is there are some teams that are already doing so horribly, like the Golden State Warriors, that we know they're going to want to be intentionally losing games towards the end. And one of the remedies the NBA is trying to suggest is maybe having a midseason tournament that rewards players, rewards teams by an extra draft pick. And another part is they half listened. They said, hey, maybe we'll shorten the NBA season from 82 games to 78 games. But they said, but then maybe we'll kick in this tournament midseason. And if I was reading it right, Brian, teams could play up to 83 games depending on if they ended up in this tournament.
Yeah, I haven't read all the details yet. And this is just all reporting anyway. This is something that the league is going to explore. So there's no plan at all yet, as far as I can tell.
But anyway, we talked about this talk I gave at the Great Lakes Analytics Conference about fixing the NBA draft. And just a brief recap, you can actually watch it. I'll try and remember to include it in the show notes if I put up the show notes this week. It's there. It is actually up. Art Rondeau and myself put together this talk. And our idea was you go to Vegas and you look at the Vegas spread for each game. And if a team outperforms the Vegas spread, either by winning a game that they're the underdog or by beating the spread, that's how you just dictate how many lottery balls they get. The way the NBA currently works is the only way for you to get lottery balls is to lose games. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that the net effect of that is it incentivizes losing for teams that can't make the playoffs. Whereas we go, this incentivizes teams to want to try and win because it gets them a better shot. And this midseason tournament, the idea is you have a team, teams would be incentivized to play their better players to try and win this tournament midseason. I heard you bringing up a point that came up a lot on Twitter when I just did a cursory glance, which is it's interesting to ask players to want to play in an extra tournament to basically get their replacements. Because if they win this tournament, the team gets a good draft pick, and that draft pick may take a roster spot from one of these players that is playing in the tournament.
To be fair, they are going to give the players and maybe coaches bonuses too, I think, as part of the proposal. But yes, why would that be part of incentivizing the players? I guess that's just to say, hey, teams, maybe you don't want to bench your players for this.
To put this at a meta level and to throw some shade, we have hated a lot of metrics that have PM in the title. So the big ones would be adjusted plus minus, followed by regularized adjusted plus minus, followed by, I think, just RPM. I forget what RPM stands for. That's what's used over by
real plus minus.
Plus minus, whatever.
Like the real Ghostbusters cartoon versus the Ghostbusters cartoon in the 80s. Do you remember that?
Yeah, Yeah, because that was funny because obviously the Ghostbusters movie, the real Ghostbusters, there's some weird IP stuff. Anyway, won't go down that rabbit hole. But there are always plus minus statistics. And the reality was in the 2000s, the play-by-play data became available, 2001 season. And this play-by-play data let people have on-off and plus-minus statistics. Plus-minus being if Brian Foster plays for the New York Knicks, the 10 minutes he plays.
You're mean, Dre. Sorry, go ahead.
You're almost good enough, Brian, right, to play for the Knicks? You play the 10 minutes you play, they outscore the opponent by 20 points. The 30 minutes you don't play, they're outscored by 10 points. Your plus minus is plus 10 or whatever, right? Or plus 30 in that scenario that I just provided. This data became available and people wanted it to mean something. And I'm not actually saying that concept on off plus minus doesn't mean anything, but the reality in examining that data is that it was very noisy and that this is just a common part of data analysis. Ooh, hard thing to say, Brian. Is that sometimes you just can't get a lot out of the data, right? Sometimes you just look at the data and go, I'm sorry, this can't tell you any. I know that you want this data to mean more than it does, but it's just too noisy. And there are all sorts of statistical tests that can say that. But just say, sorry, this data is too noisy to be meaningful. And plus minus data was that. And there have been years and years and years of just trying to pummel that data into being something meaningful. And it's just ridiculous. And the NBA draft reminds me of that, where we've seen years and years of trying to modify this draft system to try and disincentivize tanking. And with both plus minus and the draft, I'm going, as long as your initial premise is flawed. So in plus minus, the data is just too noisy. You can never make that data unnoisy unless you do something weird where you force teams to play strict lineup combinations against each other in a much bigger sample size than 82 games. Until we get that, and that ain't happening, that data can't be statistically significant. With the NBA draft, as long as teams are incentivized to lose games, none of this patchwork stuff is going to fix it, which is, by the way, why Art and my suggestion was, what if you incentivized winning? Shocking revelation, I know. So in both of those cases, just like they keep trying to patchwork this bad idea, and I'm basically saying, I'm sorry, your initial premise is so flawed that you just kind of have to go back to formula, and none of this stuff you're trying is going to fix it. That's our thoughts. Or my
no. You can definitely speak for me on that. I'll just say that like on plus minus, it seems to me like what they're trying to figure out is, so when we talk about a lineup, at least when I do anyway, I'll speak for myself, that when I talk about a lineup, I say, is it a good or bad lineup basically by the sum of its parts, right? Are these five players good, and do what they bring fit well together, right? And what plus minus seems to be saying is, no, there's something more to it than that. And while we are going to bring in these priors and make them a part of it, which is what makes it, that come out as a somewhat reasonable end result, it is that there's something different that's beyond the some of the parts that's chemistry, or I don't know what it is they're exactly trying to find there. So plus minus has always seemed like chasing the long tail to me and not very significant. But that's my thoughts as a non-stats guy anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's the funny part with plus minus versus the draft. With both of those going, the plus minus problem is like you have this box score and you have this plus minus data. And even if you have a problem with the box score, the reality is the box score is just better than plus minus for the problems people are trying to use plus minus data to do. So that's what's baffling, is that people are like, okay, this didn't work. Let's try this and let's try this. And you go, you have this other mountain of data that works better. Why don't you just use that? And that's what's annoying. And then with the NBA draft, it's this going over and over. They're like, okay, teams really seem to like tanking. What if we change the odds? Oh, they still like tanking. What if we change the odds again? Oh, they still like tanking. What if we had a tournament? It's like all this stuff where with both, it's just baffling. You just go, your initial idea is so obviously flawed, but you just don't want to give up on it. I saw a tweet today. It's a popular one that I think flows around every couple months. And it was like, retweet this with some truth about your industry that everybody knows but doesn't say. And like I said, it's repeated. I've seen this happen before. People put up good stuff, about like the tech field and entertainment industries and stuff like that. And the funny one I have is there is no such thing as an analytics-driven, logical run organization. This is a popular myth, right? Like this organization is really data savvy and whatever. And I'm not saying there aren't organizations that use data, but I'm saying at least with the way United States and I'd say most of the world systems work is you eventually have someone with enough power and money in a company that has enough clout to do what they want, that you are still beholden to the whims of people liking things. And so that happens a lot where there is an idea in a company that none of the data supports, but you just have a C-level person that's in love with it enough that it sticks around. And so that's basically the draft, right? Like the data for years and years on the draft is like, this isn't a good idea. And in spite of that, it's going to stick around, right? It's not going anywhere in the NBA for whatever reason. Taking the data, right? Like I have basketball on paper on the shelf behind me. Dean Oliver wrote about the draft and why, like, you know, this weird curve that teams follow and why the draft doesn't really work and all this stuff and all of the data anybody can do on the draft about how it's better not to, you know, it's better to be a treadmill team. This was ironically a term Kevin Pritchard popularized and then has become the embodiment of in Indiana. Because he said the worst thing to be is this mid-level team. I was always winning around 40 games and, you know, barely making the playoffs because you couldn't recap and get stars. You needed to get like good draft lottery picks to become a good team. And Indiana every year is like this playoff-worthy team that periodically picks up good players and, you know, comes close to being a contender in reality. So it's just kind of amusing that these ideas stick around and no one wants to give up on them. And that, like I said, that's my truth, is that there can be basically whimsical ideas that stick around that have nothing to do with data. And there is no organization or company or team or whatever that actually gets away from that.
Yeah, and of course, since I think that Kevin Pritchard statement was bogus, I'm very happy with what Kevin Pritchard's been doing in Indiana. I think they're heading in the right direction and had some good contracts, but that's kind of on the side. Let's get back to the tournament here, Dre. So what some people are saying is maybe they should just reduce it by a little more games and then get the tournament in. It'll be fine. I'm sure they can work that out, but I think anything to break up the regular season, you know, wouldn't be that bad. Maybe they can replace some of the All-Star Weekend stuff with the tournament because that stuff, I don't know about it. But I would love to see the tournament. I know the players don't really like it, but I love the NCAA tournament is maybe my favorite sporting event out of all sporting events. I love how they just bring in 64 teams from all over the place, and who knows what's going to happen. So I would like to see the NBA do it as a fan. Now, from a business perspective, yeah, it's a little tougher, right? It's going to be getting the union on board. I don't know how they're going to do that. They seem to be against it already. So this seems like it's in the early stages, and I want to follow it, but I'll just tell you, I want the tournament to happen, bottom line.
Love it. And yeah, I don't have much more to say. The players didn't seem too receptive. My like, if I ran an NBA team rule would be, and this would be something I think the NBA should really focus on, is no back-to-backs.
Yes.
One of the friends of the show, Data Fox 21, Paul DeVos on Twitter, has brought up a lot of data that says the correlation between like minutes played and injury isn't really there. But, and I believe in past years, I think Tom Haberstroh, I want to say that because he's usually does good articles like this. The data supports that back-to-backs are just really horrible and really risky for injury. So if I was an NBA team, I would just say no back-to-backs. This is funny because, by the way, the NBA came out recently and said you are not allowed to bench players for nationally televised, healthy players for nationally televised games. And that puts teams in a weird position, right?
Yeah.
And so my argument is the NBA, instead of trying this other stuff, instead of penalizing teams for benching healthy players, whatever, the NBA should incentivize winning in the NBA draft. Art Rondeau and myself have already come up with a better solution than they have for this. And then 2, they should get rid of back-to-backs entirely. Whatever, you know, if they can keep the season 82 games long and do that, great. If not, whatever they need to reduce it to. But all this other stuff just seems like it's odd, right? It's like like I said, it's holding on to whimsical ideas that have no place.
I need to say one more high-level thing here before we move on, which is just that we think that tanking is not an effective strategy at all, right? So when we say that tanking is still a problem, it's really just kind of a political perception problem. I'll say most forms of tanking don't work. Some do, but planning to tank before the season is not one of those things. And that's what we're really talking about here, right? So instead of, trying to change the rules a million times to get rid of tanking, I think Adam Silver should wage a political campaign to say, tanking is a bad strategy, it doesn't work, and you are lying to your fans and screwing them over by tanking. That would be effective, and it would be the truth.
Yeah, but I still think you need to get rid of the incentive entirely, because if you don't,
fair.
It's still there. But that's all of the in vogue behavioral economics, Nobel Prize winning things out of like Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler is just like people respond to incentives even in irrational ways. Last topic, Brian, is just Giannis and Carmelo Anthony were named the East and West Players of the Week. This is really weird. Carmelo Anthony has become very polarizing very quickly because Carmelo Anthony got signed by Portland. A bunch of us said, what the hell, and laughed. Carmelo Anthony played 3 games for Portland, and they were terrible. His first game in particular was egregious, and we were like, ha, ha, ha. And then he has since played, I would argue, I think you said it right, 1 good game, but at least 3, I would say, daily fantasy sports good-looking games. And for that, he was awarded the Western Conference Player of the Week, which is baffling. And 2 of those games, for what it's worth, were against Chicago, which you noted, fair enough, is a mid-tier defensive team in the NBA, but is a horrible team, right? This is a team that I think 4 games or whatever. So against a bad team, Carmelo Anthony beat up a bad team playing for Portland and got Western Conference Player of the Week, which is just baffling because conference is Luka Doncic and James Harden. And, I think Luka Doncic had like a 42-point triple-double in the same frame of time. James Harden is, of course, just keeping up his amazing play. I think, for what it's worth, so I think James Harden got one of the most efficient 60-point games in NBA history, but I think it was after that week was over with Carmelo Anthony, because it would be even worse, right?
Great. Did you see this? He was benched during that game, 1 point of his career high in scoring without realizing it. So he was annoyed by that.
I am curious why more in this load management thing, right? Like going for milestones. If you think you can beat Kobe Bryant's 81-point game, right, go for it. I don't know. It's hard to say if I would do it as a coach or not. And like in baseball, it's an interesting one where like if a pitcher is going for a perfect game, they'll let him pitch beyond their pitch count, but then normally they don't. So I don't know. It gets into a weird category there. But no, this makes no freaking sense that Carmelo Anthony is Player of the Week. It's nice that he's playing a little better. The topic I always bring up is remember the insanity. There was a period of time in Jeremy Lin's career at the start where people thought he was the next Michael Jordan because he was playing great as a rookie-ish player. I don't know if he was an official rookie because I think he played like 1 or 2 games for the Golden State Warriors.
He was a second-year player that still counted as a rookie? One of those type of players? Because he was, he played for the Warriors G League team.
1 game you can't count as a rookie.
Oh, sorry, we had some lag there, but I think you're back now. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we were saying like, Jeremy Lin might have been a rookie or like a second-year player, but was just playing amazingly. Yeah. And then he turned into a fine player. And it's like Carmelo Anthony having 2 good games after 3 seasons of horrendous play, and people are ready to turn the corner. I don't know. He didn't deserve Western Player of the Week, but the capper I want to give on this is we are always on the player's side. And, we understand that once a player's career is over, it's over. It's like why we're like, keep going, Vince Carter. So on the one hand, I'm like, Carmelo Anthony, this is a joke that these people are giving you this award. If you're Melo, take that award and do whatever you need to do to stay relevant. So good on you, Melo. Keep going.
Yeah, I want to agree with that because last year when he started the year with the Rockets and they ended up having to cut him, he was basically the worst player in the league, right? Or close to that.
That's what I know.
They lost a lot of games, and I'd say there's a non-trivial chance that he cost the Rockets the number 1 seed because they barely lost it to the Warriors. So that was a big deal, right? That really hurt them. And he wasn't the Player of the Week. He's been, pretty okay, right? I thought he was done, and it seems like he's not. He's at least got 1 more year left in him. So he's proven me wrong so far, and I hope he keeps it up, but I'm not hopeful.
There are a lot of sports movies I use as metaphors for these things. And so the funny one there when you said you could argue Melo cost him the spot, if you remember the Mighty Ducks 2, horrible movie, but fun movie. So in it, the evil team is Iceland. And Iceland loses to the Mighty Ducks in the finals. And their coach goes up and says, "You lost this game for me." And the captain of the Iceland team goes, "No, you lost it for yourself. Let's go shake their hands." You're like, yeah, Iceland or whatever. And it's the same thing. Like, you could be like, Melo arguably cost them a playoff spot. It's like, no, they cost themselves a playoff spot, because if I'm a professional athlete and my job is to make shots and get paid, if the Rockets put me in the game and let me take a shot, I will do it. That's what I should do. That is what Melo should do. That is what agent should say he should do. So if Daryl Morey and Mike D'Antoni want to sign Melo and give him minutes, it's on them, right?
Right. That's a good point.
So he didn't. Yeah, I would want to flip that switch. The other funny one, one of my favorite bad, so bad it's good movies is I can call Little Big League, and it's about this kid who inherits the Minnesota Twins, and one of his favorite players is on the team, but he's over the hill, and at one point this guy gets a hit and he's just really excited. And one of the other coaches has to go to him, look at, dude, you've got this guy batting in the middle of the order. Are you really going to be that excited about a routine hit? And it's the same, like Melo having 2 good games does not mean he's back. Let's calm down a bit. Now we're hoping he's back, but it is still just ridiculous to me how polarizing.
It's all about expectations, though. Like, I didn't think he could even belong in the league anymore, but he's at least able to, kind of stay on the court, right? That's something.
Yeah, we'll take it. All right. Well, that was all the topics I had. So I'll let you get the capper, Brian, and then we can head out.
I don't have any organized shout-outs, but how about this? Why don't I give an update on Nimrod? Nimrod was actually a biblical figure.
Ooh, biblical. Okay.
Yeah, known for his good hunting, and he was also a king. And yeah, according to the Old Testament, he was the son of Cush, who's the son of Ham, who's the son of Noah. So there you go, Dre. He's a biblical hunter.
All right. Thanks for getting the correction. I think I was right on Bugs Bunny, though, right? The same Wikipedia articles say that in pop culture or whatever.
Oh, I didn't go that far, but yeah, I think you got the gist of it. Yep.
Oh, I will take it. They're definitely. We'll give a shout out to Chris Ye, who will be on the show in future. Definitely excited about that. Luka Doncic for just killing it at age 20. There's some other shout outs I'm sure I should give to, but that'll be it for now. Anyway, I've been your host, Dre Alvarez. With me, as always, Brian Foster. You can find us on Twitter as Nerd Numbers and Boxscore Brian, respectively. We go live, back to it, Brian, Mondays, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. Of course, we have it in podcast form, iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geeks Show. Subscribe, upvote, helps us out. You can catch recaps of the show on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I think that's everything, Brian. Catch us at the site, boxscoregeeks.com. If I forgot anything, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.